My name is Captain Alara Quinn, and I was 32 the morning my mother asked me, almost gently, almost kindly, to become someone smaller than I was for the comfort of a room full of people who had never met me, and, if she had her way, never truly would. She stood in the doorway of my childhood bedroom holding a pale silver dress on a hanger, the kind of dress that didn't ask questions and didn't tell stories, the kind that folded a person into softness and erased the edges. And she told me not to wear my uniform to my brother's wedding because, as she put it with a careful voice that tried to sound reasonable instead of afraid, the military is embarrassing, and she only needed this from me once. Just this once. Just blend in. Just don't make it a thing. Just don't turn it into something people would remember. I had flown across the country for that wedding, carrying a life in a bag that fit in overhead storage, a life that had taken years to build and seconds for her to dismiss, and I had kept quiet for so long that silence had become a habit I wore as naturally as my boots. But standing there in that hallway with the light from the window cutting across the floor and the dress hanging between us like an offer and a warning at the same time, I realized something I had been avoiding for years, something that had been building slowly under every polite conversation and every redirected question and every moment I let pass without correction. She did not know who I was, not really, not in any way that mattered, and worse than that, she had decided she did not want to know. And the truth, the part that unsettled me even more in that moment, was that I didn't know who would be in that ballroom either. Not really. Not beyond the surface details my family had repeated like a script about refinement and status and expectations. And what happened when I walked through those doors later that day is something that has never left me, something that sits in the center of my memory like a fixed point I can measure everything else against. Let me go back, because to understand that moment you need to understand who I had been for a very long time before that doorway, before the dress, before the choice. My apartment near the base is small enough that I can pack it in under an hour if I have to, and I like it that way because it means nothing owns me that I can't carry. And I keep my boots by the door and my coffee black and strong, and most nights I am asleep before the world has decided whether it is going to be kind or not. And the people I serve with know me in ways my own family never tried to, because we have eaten out of the same cans and stood the same watches and stayed awake through the same long nights when one of us couldn't sleep. And there is a kind of trust built in those hours that doesn't ask for explanation or apology. It just exists, solid and quiet and earned. My family, my actual family, the one I share blood with, has always felt like a different country with a language I was never quite fluent in, and I am the older sibling, the one who left at 18 and came back wrong, not in the way they had planned, not in the way that fit the shape they had already decided for me, and so I became something else instead, something useful but distant, the one who sends birthday cards on time and shows up to funerals without needing to be asked and carries the heavy things so no one else has to, the one who keeps the peace and absorbs the weight and makes sure nothing becomes uncomfortable. That has been my role in the Quinn family for as long as I can remember. So when my mother called and asked me to come home for Adrian's wedding, I said yes before she even finished the sentence because I always say yes, because that is what I have trained myself to do, and I booked the flight and pressed my uniform out of habit and told myself this would be simple, just a toast, a dance, a flight back, an operation with clear steps and a defined end, something I could plan and execute and leave behind. I am very good at planning operations. I am terrible at predicting my own family. There is something about me I still don't fully understand, even now, even after everything, and it is this. I can stand completely calm under pressure. I can make decisions with consequences I will carry for the rest of my life. I can give orders knowing exactly what they cost, but put my mother in front of me with that particular look of disappointment, the one she has perfected over decades, and I become smaller, quieter, easier to manage. Like some part of me still believes I need to earn something from her that was never actually being offered. That weekend, I found out exactly how much that habit had cost me. Because being overlooked does not happen all at once. It does not arrive as a single moment you can point to and name. It builds slowly, quietly, in 1,000 small decisions and dismissals, until one day you realize you have been edited out of your own story without ever agreeing to it. When I enlisted, my mother told people I was, quote, taking time to figure things out. When I was commissioned, she didn't attend the ceremony because she had a charity luncheon she said she couldn't reschedule. When I was promoted, she changed the subject to a kitchen renovation someone else was doing. And over time, I learned to stop offering the information that would only be redirected anyway. I would start to mention a deployment and watch her smile tighten just slightly, polite and controlled. And I would stop mid-sentence because I had already learned how the conversation would end. Once, at a backyard gathering, a neighbor asked what I did, and before I could answer, my mother answered for me, dismissing years of work and sacrifice with the single line spoken lightly enough that no one challenged it. "Oh, Alara's in the service," she said. "It's a phase." And later that night, through the vents that carried sound straight up to my old bedroom, I heard her say the word she thought I would never hear. "The military is embarrassing." I heard it at 24. I heard it again at 28. By 30, I had stopped reacting to it outwardly, but something in me had shifted, something quieter and harder, something that learned to expect less and say less and show less, because you cannot argue someone into respecting you. I learned that the hard way. So I became the daughter who sent money on holidays and never talked about her work, and everyone seemed perfectly comfortable with that arrangement, because it required nothing from them and cost them nothing to maintain. No one ever asked what I actually did. Not once. Not my mother. Not my father. Not my brother. They had already decided who I was, and it was easier for everyone if I stayed within those lines. And for a long time, I did, right up until I couldn't anymore. Adrian had always been the easier one to celebrate, not necessarily better or smarter, but more aligned with the version of success my mother understood and valued, the kind that came with a stable career and predictable milestones and visible markers of progress. And when he announced his engagement, my mother cried the kind of tears that signal arrival, the kind that say something has finally gone right. The woman he was marrying was named Lillian Hartwell, and the way my mother said her name, you would think it carried weight beyond itself, something inherited, something established, something that confirmed everything she had been trying to build her entire adult life. The Hartwells, as I was quickly informed, were old money, not loud or showy, but steady and rooted and connected in ways that made doors open without explanation. And to my mother, this wedding was not just about Adrian, it was about validation, about becoming the kind of family she had always wanted to be seen as. And in that vision, I did not quite fit. So I was given my instructions, subtle but clear. Show up, smile, do not draw attention. I was used to that. What I was not used to was Lillian, because the first time we spoke, she asked questions no one in my own family had ever asked. Real questions, not polite placeholders, and she listened to the answers without interrupting or redirecting, and at the end of that conversation, she said something that stayed with me longer than I expected. I'm really glad Adrian has a sister like you. I didn't know what to do with that, because no one in my family had said anything like it in years. And I should have wondered then what kind of family had raised someone who could see me that clearly in a single conversation. But I didn't. I was too used to being unseen to recognize what it looked like when someone actually did. I remember the way the fabric felt in my hands, stiff and synthetic and wrong, like something that had been chosen not just without me in mind, but specifically against me. And I stood there in that narrow hallway while laughter spilled out from the bridal suite, soft and musical and coordinated, like everything about this day had been carefully arranged to exclude me without ever saying it out loud. And I told myself to breathe, to smile, to not make this into something bigger than it already was, because that's what I had always done. That's what I had been trained to do in this family, where silence was rewarded and discomfort was reframed as overreaction. Try it on, my sister called from inside the room, her voice light, almost distracted, like she had already moved on from the moment she handed me the dress, like my reaction didn't matter, like I was just another task being checked off her wedding list. And I swallowed whatever response had climbed up my throat and forced my feet forward, back into the room where 7 identical versions of perfection turned, glanced at me, and then quickly looked away. I could feel it before I even stepped fully inside. The shift, the subtle tightening of smiles, the flicker of eyes scanning me, the dress in my hands, the size label I had tried not to look at but couldn't ignore. And I knew, without anyone saying a word, that they had all noticed, that they all understood something I was only just beginning to admit to myself, which was that I had been placed here not to belong but to contrast. It's just a different style, my mom added quickly, stepping in behind me, her voice carrying that practiced softness she used when she was smoothing over something sharp, something intentional, something she didn't want to be questioned. And I nodded, because arguing would mean attention, and attention would mean explanation, and explanation would mean admitting that this hurt in a way that went far deeper than a dress. So I went to the bathroom, locked the door behind me, and stood there under the harsh overhead light as I unzipped my jeans and pulled the orange fabric over my head. And for a moment I just stared at myself, because it wasn't just big, it was wrong in every possible way, hanging loose where it should have been fitted, pulling tight where it should have flowed. And the color, God, the color was so loud it felt like a warning sign, like I had been marked. And I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so precise, so deliberate, so perfectly aligned with every quiet message I had ever received growing up in this family, where my sister was the golden one, and I was the afterthought, the adjustment, the explanation that came with a shrug. I adjusted the straps, smoothed the fabric, tried to make it look intentional, and when I stepped back into the room, no one said anything at first, which somehow felt worse than if they had laughed outright, because silence can carry a kind of agreement that words don't need to confirm. "Oh," one of the bridesmaids finally said, her tone lifting just enough to signal that something was off. "That's bold." Bold. I nodded again, because what else was there to do? And I caught my sister's reflection in the mirror as she looked at me, really looked at me for the first time since I walked in, and for a split second something flickered across her face. Hesitation, maybe, or guilt. But it was gone just as quickly, replaced by that same calm, curated expression she had been wearing all morning. "It's fine," she said, turning back to the makeup artist, dismissing the moment like it didn't matter, like I didn't matter. And that was when something inside me, something small but steady, shifted. Because it wasn't about the dress. It had never been about the dress. It was about every holiday where I sat at the edge of the table while conversations flowed around me like I wasn't part of them. Every introduction where I was reduced to a simplified version of myself that fit better into their narrative. Every time my achievements were acknowledged with polite smiles while my sisters were celebrated like milestones. And suddenly, standing there in that ridiculous orange dress, I realized that I had spent years trying to earn a place in a family that had already decided where I belonged. And it wasn't beside them. It was behind them, or outside entirely. "Brooke, we're running late," my mom said, glancing at her watch, already moving toward the door, already transitioning into the next phase of the day, the ceremony, the photos, the performance. And I followed, because for now, there was still a part of me that needed to see this through, that needed to understand exactly how far this would go. Because something told me this wasn't the worst part, not even close. By the time the ceremony began, I had stopped trying to adjust the dress, stopped pulling at the fabric or smoothing it down. Because there comes a point when you realize that no amount of fixing will change something that was designed to look wrong on you. And instead of shrinking into it, I straightened my shoulders and walked down that aisle exactly as I was, feeling every glad linger just a second too long, hearing the whispers that weren't meant to be heard. And for the first time in my life, I didn't try to make myself smaller to make other people comfortable. The venue was beautiful in the way expensive things always are. Soft white flowers, perfect lighting, everything curated down to the smallest detail. And I took my place among the bridesmaids, a line of lavender and then me, a single streak of orange that didn't belong, didn't match, didn't fit. And I realized something almost calmly. I wasn't supposed to. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of vows and applause, my sister glowing, my parents beaming, cameras flashing, and I stood there, present but not included, visible but not seen, and when it was over and everyone began moving toward the reception, that was when everything finally shifted. Because the reception was where roles changed, where introductions happened, where people asked questions, and where truth, if it was going to surface, had nowhere left to hide. I was standing near the edge of the room, a glass of champagne untouched in my hand, when I heard my mom's voice behind me, light and practiced. The same tone she had used my entire life when explaining me to other people. "And this is Brooke," she said, and I turned slowly, already knowing what was coming, already feeling that familiar tightening in my chest. She's still figuring things out. Still figuring things out. At 33, after everything, after years of building something they had never bothered to understand. And this time I didn't nod. I didn't smile. I didn't let it pass. "Actually," I said, my voice calm enough that it surprised even me, and the small circle around us paused, polite smiles freezing in place, waiting. "I run a private consulting firm." My mom blinked, just once, like she hadn't heard me correctly. I set the glass down. "Most of my clients are in the room," I added, letting my gaze move. Not dramatically, not for effect, just enough. And one by one, recognition flickered across faces, subtle at first, then undeniable, as conversations nearby quieted and attention shifted in a way that could no longer be ignored. Because the groom's father straightened, because one of the bridesmaids' husbands actually stepped closer, because someone behind me said my name, not as a question, but as confirmation. And suddenly the narrative they had built, the one where I was the afterthought, the disappointment, the vague explanation that required a soft voice and a dismissive smile, it cracked. "You," my sister started, turning toward me fully now, her expression no longer curated, no longer controlled. "You never said." "I tried," I replied, still calm, still steady. "You just never asked." And that was the moment. Not loud, not explosive, but final. Because everything that came after, the apologies, the rushed explanations, the way my mom's hand found my arm as if proximity could undo years of distance, the way my dad cleared his throat and tried to reframe the conversation into something more comfortable, more manageable, none of it mattered, because they didn't change when they learned the truth. They changed when the room did. And that told me everything I needed to know. "I'm happy for you," I said to my sister, and I meant it in the simplest, most detached way possible. Not unkind, but no longer tethered to the need for her approval, and I stepped back, out of the circle, out of the version of myself they had held onto for so long. "Brooke, wait," my mom said, her voice sharper now, edged with something close to urgency. "We didn't know." "You did," I interrupted gently, meeting her eyes for what felt like the first honest moment between us. "You just didn't care to." Silence followed that. Real silence, not the polite kind. The kind that settles when something true has been said and can't be taken back. I picked up my bag, smoothed the ridiculous orange fabric one last time, and walked out. No scene, no tears, no looking back, because walking away isn't always about anger. Sometimes, it's about clarity. And as the doors closed behind me and the noise of the reception faded into something distant and irrelevant, I realized that for the first time in my life, I wasn't standing outside of something I wanted to be part of. I was leaving something that never deserved me. So here's the question I still think about. Not whether they regret it now, because I'm sure they do in their own way, but whether you should have to prove your worth to the people who were supposed to see it first.